The most dangerous men in history usually look ordinary. Commander Valera heard the words just seconds before the emergency lights flooded the lower deck in pulsing crimson. The metallic corridors of the battlecruiser Virex hummed beneath her boots as alarms echoed through the ship like a wounded animal gasping for breath. Somewhere beyond the armored walls, pirate boarding craft scraped against the hull. Crew members rushed past carrying pulse carbines and emergency gear, their faces pale beneath the cold blue glow of the overhead strips. Valera ignored them. Her attention remained fixed on the kitchen door at the end of the corridor. It stood half open. Steam drifted through the gap. And inside, something felt wrong. The commander tightened her grip around the sidearm at her hip and stepped forward slowly. The scent reached her first. Black pepper, simmering broth, fresh bread warming on a steel tray. Normal smells. Peaceful smells. Completely out of place during a boarding emergency. Then she pushed the door open. Silence. 14 armored pirates sat motionless across the floor, unconscious beside overturned tables and scattered weapons. No scorch marks. No signs of a firefight. Just silence and the low bubbling sound of soup cooking on the stove. In the center of the kitchen, Marcus Hale calmly stirred a steaming pot with one hand while adjusting the oven temperature with the other. The old human never looked up. "You're late," he said quietly. Valera stared at him. His gray apron was spotless, not even wrinkled. "What happened here?" she demanded. Marcus lifted the spoon, tasted the broth, then added a pinch of seasoning with slow precision. "Your security team panicked," he replied. "Someone had to keep the kitchen from getting damaged." Another pirate groaned weakly somewhere near the supply shelves. Valera's golden eyes narrowed. The intruders were elite raiders from the Karth syndicates. Even trained soldiers struggled against them. Yet somehow her 52-year-old human cook had neutralized an entire boarding squad without firing a shot. Marcus finally looked at her. Pale blue eyes. Calm. Tired. The kind of eyes that had seen too many winters. "The bread's almost done," he said. "You should eat before the next attack wave." Valera felt something unfamiliar crawl down her spine. Fear. Not because of the pirates. Because of him. 36 hours earlier, Marcus Hale had arrived aboard the Virex carrying a single duffel bag and an old metal cooking kit wrapped in cloth. No military record. No criminal history. No family. Just a quiet Earth citizen applying for a kitchen position on a frontier warship. At first, she thought he was fragile. Human. Harmless. But strange details kept surfacing. He knew military protocols before officers spoke them aloud. He predicted a reactor fluctuation 17 minutes before engineering detected it. Veteran Marines unconsciously stepped aside whenever he entered a room. And tonight, during the chaos of the pirate assault, the ship's tactical AI had frozen for exactly 3 seconds after scanning Marcus Hale's face. 3 seconds later, every classified terminal aboard the Virex displayed the same message in blood-red letters. Warning, restricted Earth archive detected. Do not wake him. Marcus placed a bowl of soup onto the counter and slid it toward her. Steam curled upward between them like smoke rising from old ruins. "Commander," he said softly, "you should sit down before your hands start shaking." Only then did Valera realize they already were. Commander Valera did not sleep that night. The Virex drifted through the outer edges of the Talon expanse while damaged shield arrays crackled softly against the black vacuum outside. Most of the crew had returned to their stations after the failed boarding attempt, but the mood aboard the warship had changed. Corridors that once carried the sharp confidence of military routine now felt quieter. Slower. Marines spoke in hushed voices whenever the human cook passed nearby. Some avoided looking directly at him altogether. Valera stood alone inside the command deck, her golden eyes fixed on the holographic file floating above the tactical console. The red warning text still burned across the screen. Restricted Earth Archive. Access denied by Terran authority. She tapped the console again. Override commander clearance. The ship intelligence responded immediately. Request denied. Valera's jaw tightened. Reason? There was a brief pause before the cold mechanical voice answered. Psychological hazard classification. That made her stomach twist. She had commanded fleets through civil wars and pirate sectors for 11 years. She had negotiated with crime syndicates and stared down planetary governors without blinking once. But she had never seen a military archive classify a single man as a psychological hazard, especially not a cook. Behind her, the command deck doors slid open with a soft hydraulic hiss. Lieutenant Sarek stepped inside, carrying a data pad against his chest. The reptilian officer looked uneasy. "Commander," he said carefully. Engineering completed their review of the kitchen security feed. Veolyra turned slowly. "And?" Sarek swallowed once. "There is no footage." "Impossible." "Yes, Commander." He handed her the pad. Every camera on Deck 12 shut down for exactly 4 minutes and 17 seconds during the boarding event. Veolyra stared at the report in silence. "Coincidence?" she asked quietly. Sarek hesitated too long before answering. "I do not believe so." The commander dismissed him a moment later and remained alone in the dim command center. Beyond the massive forward viewport, stars drifted like frozen silver dust across endless darkness. Her reflection stared back at her from the glass. Sharp uniform, tired eyes, a commander losing control of her own ship. Then another memory surfaced. Earlier that evening, before the alarms sounded, she had walked past the kitchen and seen Marcus standing perfectly still beside the stove. Not cooking, not moving, just listening, as if he had sensed the pirate vessels approaching long before the scanners detected them. Veolyra exhaled slowly and left the command deck. The lower corridors were quieter now. Emergency lights had faded back to their normal pale blue glow. Somewhere in the distance, engines vibrated through the metal walls with the steady pulse of a sleeping giant. When she reached the kitchen entrance, she stopped. Marcus Hale sat alone at the stainless steel counter polishing an old kitchen. Knife with a cloth. Steam rose gently from a fresh pot of coffee beside him. The overhead light cast soft silver across his weathered face, making the faint scars along his hands easier to see. He looked up before she spoke. "You are walking louder tonight," he said calmly. Veolyra crossed her arms. "Who are you?" Marcus folded the cloth carefully and placed the knife down beside the cutting board. "Just the cook. People do not erase security systems by accident." "No," he agreed quietly. "They usually do it on purpose." That answer irritated her more than silence would have. "The pirates knew you," she pressed. "One of them froze the moment he saw your face." Marcus poured coffee into 2 metal cups. "Fear makes people remember old stories." He slid 1 cup toward her across the counter. Veolyra did not touch it. "And what story are you?" For the first time since she met him, Marcus looked tired instead of calm. Truly tired. The kind that reached into the bones. He stared into the steam curling from his coffee before answering softly. The kind people wish had stayed buried. The next morning, Commander Veolyra found half her crew gathered near the kitchen entrance pretending not to stare. Marines who once laughed through plasma storms now stood strangely quiet, watching the old human move between steel counters beneath the warm amber lights. Marcus Hale sliced vegetables with slow, precise movements while fresh bread baked somewhere deeper in the ovens. The scent filled the corridor, rich and comforting, almost enough to make the warship feel human. Almost. A young communications officer stepped carefully into the kitchen carrying an empty tray. "Sir," he asked nervously, "do you need help?" Marcus glanced up from the cutting board. "You know how to peel potatoes?" "No, sir." "Then you would probably make my life harder." A few nearby Marines chuckled softly in relief. Tension eased for exactly 3 seconds. Then the entire ship shuddered beneath their feet. Emergency sirens roared again. Red lights flooded the corridor. Every crew member instantly snapped back into motion. "Incoming vessels," someone shouted through the intercom. Unknown signatures. Emerging from drift space. Veolyra entered the corridor at full stride, her dark blue command coat trailing behind her. "Battle stations now," she ordered. Crew members scattered immediately, but Marcus did not move. He calmly lowered the stove temperature and covered the soup pot with a lid before reaching for another tray of bread. Veolyra stopped in front of him. "We are under attack again." "I know." "Then why are you still cooking?" Marcus brushed flour from his scarred hands. "Because frightened people still need to eat." The answer hit harder than she expected. Before she could respond, the tactical alarm changed pitch. A low mechanical pulse echoed through the ship. "Worse news. Commander," the artificial intelligence announced over the intercom, "multiple enemy vessels have locked onto engineering." Veolyra's eyes narrowed. Engineering housed the Virex reactor core. If disabled, The cruiser would drift powerless through pirate territory. Seal lower decks, she ordered. Deploy security teams to engineering access corridors. The ship answered with rapid footsteps and metallic doors slamming shut across nearby halls. Then Marcus quietly asked, "How many attackers?" Veolyra frowned. "Approximately 300. Marcus nodded once. "Too many for a random raid." She studied him carefully. "You sound certain." "Pirates are greedy," he replied while placing fresh bread onto a cooling rack. "But organized movements like this usually mean someone paid them." Veolyra felt a cold pressure settle behind her ribs. Because deep down, she already suspected the same thing. Someone out there knew Marcus Hale was aboard her ship. The thought became harder to ignore when the tactical screens suddenly flickered. Every display in the corridor froze for half a second before a symbol appeared across the monitors. A black wolf surrounded by stars. Marcus stopped moving entirely. The silence around him deepened. One of the older Marines nearby visibly stepped backward after seeing the symbol. Veolyra noticed immediately. "You recognize it," she said. The Marine swallowed hard. "My grandfather fought during the Europa conflicts." His voice sounded smaller now. "He used to. Talk about that insignia." Veolyra looked toward Marcus. "What does it mean?" But the human cook was no longer looking at the screens. He stared instead at the kitchen window where distant stars drifted silently beyond reinforced glass. His reflection in the dark surface looked older somehow. Heavier. "It means," Marcus said softly, "someone finally remembered I am still alive." At that exact moment, the ship lights dimmed across every deck. Then the main reactor alarms began to scream. Darkness rolled across the Virex like a living tide. 1 second the warship glowed with its usual cold blue lighting. The next, entire sections vanished into shadow while emergency systems struggled to compensate. Red backup strips flickered weakly along the floor panels, casting the corridors in pulsing crimson. Somewhere deep inside the ship, metal groaned beneath the strain of failing power conduits. Commander Veolyra moved quickly through the command corridor while officers shouted status reports around her. Main reactor output dropping below 40%. Engineering cannot stabilize the core. Enemy ships are jamming external communications. Every voice carried the same thing now. Fear. Veolyra hated fear. It spread faster than fire aboard a warship. She reached the central tactical chamber and slammed both hands against the glowing command table. Holographic projections flickered violently above it, showing 6 hostile vessels tightening formation around the drifting cruiser. They were not firing. Not yet. They were waiting. "Why are they holding position?" Veolyra demanded. Lieutenant Sarek adjusted his headset with trembling claws. "Commander, they are transmitting a direct request." "Play it." Static filled the room for 2 long seconds before a distorted voice emerged through the speakers. Calm. Mechanical. Almost amused. "Deliver Marcus Hale alive, and your crew will be permitted safe passage." Silence crushed the room. Every officer slowly turned toward Veolyra. The commander felt ice settle in her chest. It was no longer a theory. This attack had never been about territory or supplies. Someone had hunted her ship across deep space for one man. Sarek spoke. Carefully. "Commander, who exactly is our cook?" Veolyra did not answer, because she no longer trusted any answer she might give. The distorted voice continued through the speakers. "You do not understand what is aboard your vessel. Humanity buried him for a reason." Then the transmission ended. A heavy silence followed. Only the distant vibration of the damaged engines filled the chamber now. Veolyra stared at the tactical display while her thoughts twisted tighter with every passing second. Humanity buried him for a reason. Before she could respond, another voice spoke quietly behind her. "That is a dramatic way to describe retirement." The entire command staff flinched. Marcus Hale stood near the chamber entrance holding a metal tray with 6 steaming cups of coffee balanced perfectly across it. Nobody had heard him enter. The old human calmly crossed the room while officers instinctively stepped aside to clear his path. He placed the tray onto the command table 1 cup at a time. "Low sugar for the lieutenant," he said softly. "Extra cream for navigation." Veolyra stared at him in disbelief. "We are moments away from losing the ship." Marcus nodded once. "Yes. And you brought coffee?" "People think better when they are warm." No one touched the cups. Marcus seemed unsurprised by that. He glanced up at the tactical projections hovering above them. 6 enemy ships. Tight formation. Precise positioning. His pale blue eyes narrowed slightly. Professional, he murmured. Not pirates. Veolyra stepped toward him. They asked for you directly. I heard. Then tell me what is happening. Marcus looked around the chamber slowly. Young officers. Nervous Marines. Exhausted crew members trying very hard not to panic. For a brief moment, something painful crossed his face. Regret maybe. Or memory. Then he sighed softly. 20 years ago, he said quietly, Earth fought a war nobody was supposed to survive. The room became still enough to hear the faint hum of damaged ceiling lights. Marcus rested one scarred hand against the command table. By the end of it, he continued, there were not many people left willing to do terrible things for victory. Veolyra felt. Her pulse slow. And you were one of them. Marcus met her eyes for the first time since entering the chamber. Commander, he said gently, I was the reason the war ended. No one spoke for several seconds after Marcus finished the sentence. The command chamber remained frozen beneath the pulsing red emergency lights, while the damaged engines vibrated through the floor like a distant heartbeat. Commander Veolyra studied the humans standing across from her and felt something deeply unsettling settle into place. Marcus Hale did not look like the end of a war. He looked tired. His gray apron still carried faint traces of flour near the sleeves. One of the coffee cups continued steaming quietly beside his hand. There was no pride in his face. No arrogance. Just exhaustion that seemed older than the ship itself. Lieutenant Sarek finally broke the silence. The Europa conflicts ended almost 2 decades ago. Marcus nodded once. Yes. Earth lost over 2 billion civilians during those campaigns. Yes. Sarek swallowed carefully. And the final offensive, he stopped speaking. Veolyra noticed the reptilian officer suddenly avoiding eye contact with the human cook. Marcus saved him from finishing. People tell stories differently when enough years pass, he said softly. Eventually nobody remembers the cold, or the hunger, or how desperate everyone became. Veolyra crossed her arms tightly. You expect me to believe you were simply a soldier? Marcus looked toward the dark viewport overlooking the stars. No, he admitted quietly. Not a soldier anymore by the end. The commander stepped closer. Then what were you? The room waited for his answer. Marcus remained silent long enough for the overhead lights to flicker again. Somewhere beyond the hull, distant enemy ships continued circling like predators around wounded prey. Finally, the old human reached into the inner pocket of his apron and removed a small metal object no larger than a coin. He placed it gently onto the command table. Veolyra frowned. It looked ancient, scratched steel worn smooth by time. The symbol of a black wolf rested at its center surrounded by faded Terran lettering. Lieutenant Sarek inhaled sharply the moment he saw it. Stars above, he whispered. It is real. Marcus rested one hand against the table edge. That emblem belonged to the 7th Earth Fleet. His voice stayed calm, quiet. By the final year of the war, only one ship remained operational. Veolyra stared at the coin. Yours. Marcus nodded. Mine. The commander suddenly understood why the older Marines aboard the Virex had gone pale earlier. Why the archive warnings carried psychological hazard classifications. Why veteran soldiers stepped aside whenever Marcus walked near them. Not because they feared his strength. Because they remembered what survival had turned him into. A soft beep interrupted the silence. One of the tactical officers looked up from his station. Commander, incoming transmission again. Veolyra straightened immediately. On screen, the holographic display flickered alive above the command table. This time the distorted figure appeared only as a dark silhouette surrounded by static. Your reactor will fail within 27 minutes, the mechanical voice announced calmly. Surrender Marcus Hale, and your crew survives. Veolyra's jaw tightened. And if I refuse? The figure paused. Then your ship dies protecting a man humanity itself tried to erase. The transmission ended. Silence returned once more. Marcus slowly picked up the untouched coffee cup nearest him and took a small sip while the officers exchanged uneasy looks. Veolyra stared at him. Did humanity really try to erase you? Marcus lowered the cup carefully. No, he said after a moment. Humanity tried to forget me. The difference somehow sounded worse. He looked around the command chamber one final time before quietly removing his apron. The fabric folded neatly in his scarred hands. "Commander," he said gently, "if they board this ship again, keep your crew away from Deck 12. Veolyra frowned. "Why?" Marcus placed the folded apron beside the old wolf coin. Then for the first time since she met him, there was no warmth left in his eyes at all. "Because I am very tired," he said softly. "And tired men make dangerous decisions." The Virex had 23 minutes of reactor stability remaining when Commander Veolyra walked alone toward Deck 12. The corridors felt colder now. Not physically, emotionally. Crew members avoided speaking above whispers as she passed, and every tactical screen across the ship displayed the same silent countdown in glowing red numbers. 22 minutes. 21. Somewhere behind reinforced walls, engineers fought desperately to stabilize the failing reactor core while enemy vessels maintained their silent blockade outside. They still were not firing. They did not need to. They already knew fear was spreading faster than damage. Veolyra reached the lower kitchen deck expecting chaos. Instead, she found warmth. Soft amber lights glowed above the stainless steel counters. Fresh coffee brewed quietly beside the stove. Bread cooled on metal racks beneath clean white cloths. And Marcus Hale stood at the sink washing dishes as if the galaxy were not collapsing around them. Water ran gently over his scarred hands while distant alarms echoed faintly through the ceiling vents. The contrast unsettled her more than any battlefield ever had. "You should be preparing for evacuation," she said. Marcus dried one plate carefully before answering. "There is nowhere safe left for this crew if those ships want me badly enough." Veolyra stepped closer. "Then tell me who they are." Marcus paused. "Just briefly. Old survivors," he replied softly. "Some wars end officially long before people stop fighting them." He placed the plate onto the drying rack with precise care. Veolyra noticed something resting on the counter nearby. An old photograph printed on actual paper. Rare. Human. The edges looked worn from years of handling. She picked it up slowly. Marcus did not stop her. The image showed a much younger version of him standing beside a massive Terran warship beneath a gray sky. His hair was darker then, his shoulders broader. Around him stood dozens of soldiers in black uniforms marked with the wolf insignia. Most looked barely older than teenagers. But what caught her attention was Marcus himself. He was smiling. Not the quiet, tired expression she knew now. A real smile. Warm. Alive. "What happened to them?" Veolyra asked. Quietly. Marcus stared at the photograph for a long moment before speaking. "The same thing that happens to most young soldiers." His voice remained calm, but something underneath it sounded hollow. "They trusted someone older than them." Veolyra carefully placed the picture back down. "You blame yourself." Marcus let out a faint breath that almost sounded like a laugh. "Commander, when millions die under your command, blame becomes less interesting than memory." Silence settled between them while the kitchen lights hummed softly overhead. Then the ship suddenly shook hard enough to rattle the hanging cookware. Warning sirens erupted again. "Hull breach detected on cargo deck 3, the intercom shouted. "Multiple unauthorized boarders confirmed." Veolyra instinctively reached for her sidearm. Marcus did not move immediately. He simply closed the water valve and dried his hands with a towel. Calm. Methodical. Like a man preparing dinner instead of facing an invasion. "How many?" he asked. The artificial intelligence answered instantly. "Estimated hostile count, 47. Marcus nodded once. "Smaller team this time." Veolyra stared at him. "You say that like you expected them." "I did." He walked toward a small storage locker near the far wall and entered a security code faster than she could follow. The lock hissed open. Inside rested something wrapped carefully in dark cloth. Marcus unfolded it slowly. Not a rifle. Not armor. Just an old black combat jacket marked with the faded wolf insignia across one shoulder. The fabric looked ancient but perfectly maintained. Veolyra watched his expression change the moment he touched it. Not anger. Not excitement. Something worse. Familiarity. Marcus slipped the jacket on carefully over his plain gray shirt. It fit him perfectly, like he had never really stopped wearing it. Then he looked toward the commander with tired blue eyes. "You should stay here," he said softly. Veolyra straightened immediately. "I am not hiding while my crew is under attack." Marcus studied her for a second before giving a small nod. "That," he murmured quietly, "sounds exactly like someone I used to know." Then the lights flickered once. More as heavy footsteps echoed somewhere beyond the kitchen corridor. The footsteps stopped just outside the kitchen corridor. Heavy, deliberate. Commander Velara raised her sidearm immediately while the emergency lights pulsed across the walls in slow crimson waves. Somewhere deeper in the ship, automated bulkheads slammed shut one after another as the Virex attempted to contain the boarding teams. Marcus Hale stood beside the stainless steel counter in silence, his old black combat jacket hanging naturally across his shoulders as if it belonged there more than the kitchen apron ever had. Then the corridor speakers crackled softly. Marcus Hale, the distorted voice announced calmly, "We know you are aboard." Veolyra tightened her grip around the weapon. "They patched directly into internal communications," she whispered. Marcus did not seem surprised. "Yes." The voice continued. "You have hidden long enough. Do not force innocent people to suffer for your disappearance." Silence followed. Only the low vibration of the failing reactor hummed through the floor beneath them now. Veolyra glanced toward Marcus. "They are trying to draw you out." "No," he replied quietly. "They are trying to make me feel guilty enough to surrender." Another voice suddenly echoed through the corridor outside. This one was not mechanical. It sounded human. Older. "Marcus." The single word froze him completely. Veolyra saw it instantly. The subtle shift in posture. The tightening in his jaw. The memory behind his eyes. Slowly, Marcus stepped toward the kitchen doorway. "Stay behind me," he said softly. Veolyra ignored the instruction and moved with him anyway. The corridor outside looked half-dead beneath the flickering emergency strips. Steam drifted from damaged ceiling vents, while distant sparks hissed somewhere farther down the hall. At the opposite end of the corridor stood 3 figures dressed in dark tactical armor, marked with no insignia. The man in front removed his helmet first. Human, mid-60s, gray beard, deep scars crossing one side of his face. His tired eyes locked onto Marcus immediately. "Still cooking, I see," the stranger said quietly. Marcus stared at him, without blinking. "Elias." Veolyra felt the atmosphere change around them the moment the name was spoken. Not hatred, something heavier. Shared history, shared graves. Elias gave a small nod. "Been a long time." Marcus folded his arms slowly. "Not long enough." The older man smiled faintly at that, though there was no warmth behind it. "You disappeared after Europa. Half the galaxy spent 20 years searching for you. And yet somehow I still found time to make soup." Elias ignored the sarcasm. His gaze shifted briefly toward Veolyra before returning to Marcus. "You know why we are here." Marcus looked away for the first time, toward the dark corridor windows where distant stars drifted silently beyond reinforced glass. "No," he said softly. "I know why you think you are here." Elias stepped forward carefully. "The Dominion remnants are rebuilding." Veolyra frowned. Dominion. The word carried old fear across human history. During the Europa conflicts, the Dominion fleets had nearly erased Earth completely before vanishing after the final offensive. Marcus remained still. "I heard rumors." "It is not rumor anymore." Elias reached into his armor and activated a small holographic projector. A fleet appeared above his palm. Massive warships emerging from dark space beside burning colonies. Veolyra immediately recognized civilian evacuation markers across the display. 3 systems lost in 6 months, Elias said quietly. Millions displaced. Marcus stared at the hologram in silence. The reactor alarms continued screaming faintly in the background. "Earth Command wants you back," Elias finished. Marcus actually laughed at that. Softly, bitterly. "Earth Command buried me 20 years ago. Because you asked them to." Elias took another step closer. "But now people are dying again." The kitchen lights flickered weakly overhead. Marcus looked suddenly older than before. More tired. Veolyra watched his scarred hands slowly tighten at his sides. Not from anger. From memory. Finally, Marcus asked the one question that mattered. "How bad is it?" Elias held his gaze without speaking for several seconds. Then he answered quietly. "Bad enough that they remembered your name." The reactor countdown reached 12 minutes when Marcus finally sat down. Not in the command chamber. Not in some armored briefing room. He returned to the kitchen instead. Commander Veolyra followed silently, while Elias and his armored team remained outside the corridor entrance like ghosts from another lifetime. The kitchen lights glowed softly against polished steel counters while the ship trembled beneath distant impacts somewhere along the outer hull. Through it all, Marcus calmly poured water into an old kettle and switched on the burner. Veolyra stared at him in disbelief. The ship is dying. Marcus nodded once. Yes. Enemy fleets are waiting outside. I know. And you are making tea? The faintest smile touched his face. Tired. Almost sad. Tea helps people think before they ruin their lives. Steam slowly began curling upward from the kettle between them. Veolyra crossed her arms tightly. Elias said Earth Command wants you back. Marcus leaned against the counter without answering immediately. Earth Command wants a weapon back, he corrected quietly. There is a difference. The commander studied him carefully beneath the warm amber lights. For the first time since meeting Marcus Hale, she stopped seeing a monster from old war archives. She saw a man carrying too many funerals inside his head. You still care, she said softly. Marcus looked down at his scarred hands. That is the problem. Silence settled over the kitchen while distant reactor alarms pulsed faintly through the ceiling. Then Veolyra asked the question that had haunted her since the beginning. What happened at Europa? Marcus closed his eyes briefly. Not dramatically, just the exhausted reaction of someone reopening an old wound. The Dominion fleet trapped Earth's last civilian convoy near Jupiter orbit, he said quietly. 3,000 refugee ships. Families. Children. Most without weapons. His voice remained calm, but the kitchen somehow felt colder now. Earth Command ordered retreat. They believed the war was already lost. Veolyra listened without moving. Marcus stared at the rising steam from the kettle as if seeing another lifetime inside it. I disagreed. So, what did you do? Marcus finally looked at her. Pale blue eyes. Ancient exhaustion. I stayed. The single sentence carried more weight than shouting ever could. Veolyra suddenly understood why history feared this man. Not because he enjoyed war. Because once he decided someone deserved protection, entire fleets could fail trying to move him. The kettle began whistling softly. Marcus turned away and prepared 2 cups with practiced precision. The convoy survived, he continued quietly. The Dominion fleet did not. Veolyra felt her pulse slow. That battle ended the war. Yes. And after that, Marcus handed her one of the steaming cups. After that, he said softly, people started looking at me differently. He leaned against the counter again while the reactor countdown flashed across nearby monitors. 9 minutes remaining. At first they called me a hero, Marcus murmured. Then they learned how victory actually happened. Veolyra frowned. What does that mean? Marcus remained silent for several seconds. Then he gave the answer she least expected. It means war changes people slowly, he said. Until one day, you realize peace feels stranger than battle. Outside the kitchen corridor, Elias suddenly stepped forward as his communicator beeped sharply. Marcus, he said urgently. The Dominion flagship just entered local space. The atmosphere changed instantly. Even the ship itself seemed to tense around them. Elias activated a holographic projection above his wrist. A massive black vessel emerged across the display, dwarfing every surrounding ship. Veolyra inhaled sharply. She recognized the design immediately from military briefings. Dominion Command Class. Extinct for 20 years. Marcus stared at the hologram without expression. Elias lowered his voice carefully. They sent a message directly to us. What did it say? Elias hesitated before answering. It said, if the Wolf of Earth still breathes, they want to see his face before the stars go dark. The kitchen fell silent except for the soft sound of tea steaming between them. The reactor countdown reached 4 minutes when Marcus Hale finally stepped onto the bridge of the Virex wearing the old black combat jacket. Every conversation died the moment he entered. Officers who had spent their lives studying war history now stared at him the way civilians looked at storms through reinforced glass. Commander Veolyra stood near the main viewport watching the Dominion flagship drift across space ahead of them like a moving shadow large enough to swallow stars. Its dark hull blocked entire constellations from view. Silent. Waiting. Marcus walked past the tactical stations without hurry and stopped beside the forward glass. For several seconds, nobody spoke. The only sound came from the damaged reactor alarms pulsing softly beneath the bridge floor. Then Elias approached carefully, holding a communication device in one scarred hand. They are demanding visual confirmation, he said quietly. Marcus nodded once. Open the channel. The bridge lights dimmed automatically as the massive front viewport flickered into transmission mode. Static rolled briefly across the glass before a figure appeared. Tall, pale, wrapped in dark ceremonial armor marked with silver Dominion symbols. The alien commander on the other side looked ancient, yet his eyes sharpened instantly the moment they landed on Marcus. Silence stretched between them across the stars. Then the Dominion leader slowly removed his helmet. "Wolf of Earth," he said quietly. "You survived." Marcus rested one hand against the railing overlooking the bridge. Barely. Something unexpected happened then. The alien commander smiled. Not cruelly. Not mockingly. Like an old soldier recognizing another survivor from a battlefield both regretted. "For 20 years, the alien said softly, our people taught children to fear your name." Marcus looked tired more than anything else. That was probably a mistake. The Dominion commander tilted his head slightly. Was it? He glanced around the human-built cruiser behind Marcus. "Interesting ship for a retired warlord." "It has good soup," Marcus replied. A few nervous officers blinked in confusion at the answer. But the alien commander laughed quietly. Genuine laughter. "There you are," he murmured. "The same man from Europa." Veilira watched Marcus carefully. This was the first time since meeting him that he no longer seemed haunted. In front of an enemy fleet capable of destroying them all, he simply looked honest. The Dominion commander folded his hands behind his back. "You know why I came." Marcus nodded. "You want another war." "No." The alien leader's expression darkened slightly. "Our extremists want one. I came because they fear you more than death itself." Silence settled over the bridge again. Outside the viewport, the black flagship drifted silently among the stars like a memory refusing to disappear. Then Marcus quietly asked, "How many civilians are trapped in the frontier systems?" The alien commander answered immediately, "Too many." Marcus closed his eyes for one brief second. When he opened them again, the exhaustion remained. But so did something else. Decision. He looked toward Veilira. "Commander," he said softly, "prepare evacuation coordinates for every civilian transport within range." She frowned. "What are you planning?" Marcus gave the faintest smile. "The same thing I always planned." Elias stared at him carefully. "Marcus." But the old human had already stepped closer to the transmission glass. "Listen to me," he said calmly to the Dominion commander. 20 years ago, we buried enough people to poison entire stars with grief." His voice never rose. It did not need to. "I am too tired to watch children inherit another war." The alien commander remained silent. Marcus continued softly. "So here is what happens next. Your fleet stands down. The refugees leave safely. And afterward," he glanced down at the faded wolf insignia across his jacket sleeve. "Afterward, if someone still needs to blame a monster for all this fear," he looked back up through the stars, "they can blame me." No one on the bridge moved. Not even the Dominion commander. Finally, after a very long silence, the alien leader lowered his head slightly. A gesture of respect. "Perhaps," he said quietly, "that is why humanity survived you." The transmission ended moments later. Outside the viewport, the Dominion flagship slowly turned away from the Virex. One by one, the surrounding warships followed it back into dark space until only stars remained. The reactor alarms finally fell silent. Warm light returned to the bridge. Crew members exhaled shakily, like people waking from a nightmare. But Marcus Hale simply removed the old black jacket and folded it over one arm. Then he looked toward Commander Veilira with tired blue eyes and asked the strangest question possible after saving thousands of lives. "Commander," he said softly, "would your crew still like dinner?"